The morning mist clung to the ancient oak trees surrounding Sandringham estate like ghostly fingers, reluctant to release their hold on the grand Norfolk countryside. William stood at the tall windows of the drawing room, his breath fogging the glass as he watched the sun struggle to break through the December clouds. The familiar weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders, heavier than usual on this particular morning. Today was different. Today, Charlotte would arrive. He had not seen her in 3 years, not since that terrible argument that had torn their friendship apart like paper in a storm. The memory still stung with fresh pain, despite the time that had passed. Charlotte had been his closest confidant, the one person who truly understood the burden of his position, the loneliness that came with duty, and the dreams he harbored for a different kind of life. She had been the daughter of his father's closest advisor, growing up alongside him in the shadow of the monarchy, sharing secrets and fears that no one else could comprehend. Their friendship had blossomed into something deeper during their university years. While William navigated the complexities of being second in line to the throne, Charlotte pursued her passion for humanitarian work, traveling to remote corners of the world to help those forgotten by society. She had returned from one such mission 3 years ago, her eyes bright with purpose and her heart full of stories about children in refugee camps and families struggling to rebuild their lives after natural disasters. That evening, in this very room, she had spoken passionately about her work, her voice rising with excitement as she described the school she had helped establish in Syria. William had listened, captivated not just by her words, but by the fire in her eyes, the way her hands moved expressively as she painted pictures of hope emerging from despair. He had fallen deeper in love with her that night, though he had never dared to speak those words aloud. But then the conversation had taken a darker turn. Charlotte had challenged him directly, questioning why he remained trapped in ceremonial duties when he could use his influence to make real change in the world. Her words had been like arrows, each one finding its mark with devastating accuracy. She accused him of hiding behind his title, of choosing comfort over courage, of wasting his potential while others suffered needlessly. "You have everything you need to make a difference, William," she had said, her voice trembling with frustration. "Yet you choose to attend garden parties and ribbon cuttings while children die from preventable diseases. How can you sleep at night knowing you could save lives, but choose protocol instead?" The argument that followed had been brutal in its honesty. William had defended his position, explaining the constraints placed upon him, the careful balance required to maintain the monarchy's stability, the importance of tradition in an uncertain world. But Charlotte had dismissed his explanations as excuses, her disappointment evident in every word she spoke. "I thought you were different," she had whispered before walking out his life. "I thought you understood that privilege comes with responsibility, not just to your country, but to humanity itself." Those words had haunted him for 3 years, echoing in his mind during state dinners and official engagements, following him through sleepless nights and solitary walks through palace gardens. He had thrown himself into his royal duties with renewed vigor, hoping to prove her wrong, to show that his work mattered, that he was making a difference in his own way. Yet doubt continued to gnaw at him like a persistent ache. The sound of gravel crunching under car wheels interrupted his brooding thoughts. William's heart began to race as he watched a black sedan make its way up the long driveway, flanked by the bare winter trees that stood like silent sentinels. She was here. After all this time, Charlotte was returning to Sandringham, summoned by the Queen herself for reasons that remained unclear to William. He had learned of her impending visit only the day before, when his grandmother had mentioned it casually over afternoon tea. "Charlotte Pemberton will be joining us for the weekend," she had said, stirring her tea with practiced elegance. "I believe you two were once quite close." The understatement had almost made William laugh, if not for the turmoil it immediately unleashed in his chest. Close was such an inadequate word to describe what Charlotte had meant to him, what she perhaps still meant to him despite the years of silence between them. As the car drew nearer, William found himself remembering the countless hours they had spent exploring these very grounds as children. Charlotte had been fearless, climbing the tallest trees and daring him to follow, her laughter ringing across the estate like church bells on Sunday morning. She had taught him to see beauty in simple things. The way morning dew caught the light on spider webs, the pattern of frost on window panes, the sound of wind moving through wheat fields. Their childhood had been a sanctuary from the formal world of royal obligation. With Charlotte, William could simply be himself, free from the constant scrutiny and endless lessons in proper behavior. She had never treated him as a prince, but as a friend, sometimes as an equal, and occasionally as someone who needed protection from the weight of his own destiny. The car came to a stop in front of the main entrance, and William's breath caught in his throat. The driver stepped out first, followed by a figure he would have recognized anywhere, even after all these years. Charlotte emerged from the vehicle with the same graceful confidence she had possessed since childhood, though something in her bearing suggested she had been changed by her years abroad. She wore a simple dark coat that emphasized her tall, slender frame, her auburn hair pulled back in a style that was both practical and elegant. Even from his distance at the window, William could see that her face had matured, the soft curves of youth replaced by the defined features of a woman who had seen both beauty and suffering in the world. There was a strength in her posture that spoke of experiences that had tested her resolve and emerged victorious. William watched as she paused for a moment, looking up at the grand facade of Sandringham House, her expression unreadable. Did she feel the same flood of memories that was threatening to overwhelm him? Did she remember the summers they had spent racing through these corridors, the winter evenings huddled by the fireplace, sharing stories and dreams for the future? As if sensing his gaze, Charlotte suddenly looked up toward the window where he stood. Their eyes met across the distance, and William felt as though the air had been knocked from his lungs. Time seemed suspended, 3 years of separation collapsing into nothing in the space of a heartbeat. Her expression remained neutral, giving nothing away, but there was something in her eyes that made his heart stutter with hope and fear in equal measure. The moment stretched between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm, heavy with all the words they had never spoken and all the pain they had inflicted upon each other. William raised his hand slightly, an uncertain gesture that was part greeting, part apology, part plea for understanding. Charlotte's response was barely perceptible, the slightest nod of acknowledgement before she turned away to collect her luggage. The spell broken, William stepped back from the window, his hands trembling as he adjusted his tie and smoothed his hair. He knew he would have to face her soon, that there would be no avoiding the conversation that had been 3 years in the making. The thought filled him with a mixture of anticipation and dread that made his stomach churn with nervous energy. He could hear voices in the entrance hall now, the formal greetings and polite inquiries that marked the arrival of any guest to the royal household. Charlotte's voice rose above the others, warm and familiar yet somehow different, shaped by experiences he knew nothing about. He wondered what she had seen in her years away, what story she carried with her, what had brought her back to this place that held so many memories for both of them. The door to the drawing room opened, and William turned to see his private secretary approaching with the measured steps of someone bearing important news. "Your Royal Highness," the man said with a respectful bow, "Miss Pemberton has arrived. Her Majesty requests that you join them for tea in the blue drawing room in 20 minutes. 20 minutes. William nodded his acknowledgement, his throat too tight to speak. 20 minutes to prepare for a reunion that would either heal old wounds or tear them open anew. 20 minutes to find the courage to face the woman who had challenged everything he believed about himself and his purpose in the world. As his secretary withdrew, William returned to the window, watching as the car disappeared around the corner of the house toward the servants' quarters. Charlotte was somewhere within these walls now, breathing the same air, walking the same floors that had witnessed their friendship bloom and wither. The weight of her presence seemed to fill every corner of the vast estate, making it feel both more alive and more haunted than it had in years. He thought about the last words she had spoken to him, the disappointment that had colored every syllable, the way she had looked at him as though seeing a stranger. Would she look at him the same way today? Had time softened her judgment, or had her experiences in the world only reinforced her belief that he was wasting his life in meaningless ceremony? The questions multiplied in his mind like autumn leaves in a windstorm, each one bringing fresh anxiety about what the next few days would hold. He had no way of knowing what had prompted his grandmother to invite Charlotte back into their world, or what she hoped to accomplish by bringing them together again. The Queen was nothing if not strategic in her decisions, and William suspected there was more to this reunion than simple social courtesy. Whatever the reason, he knew he was not prepared for the flood of emotions that Charlotte's presence would unleash. For 3 years, he had worked to build walls around the part of his heart that belonged to her, convincing himself that their friendship had been a casualty of his duty to the crown. Now those walls felt as fragile as tissue paper, ready to crumble at the first sight of her smile or the sound of her laughter. The clock on the mantelpiece chimed the quarter hour, reminding him that his time for reflection was running short. Soon he would have to face Charlotte in the formal setting of afternoon tea, surrounded by the trappings of royal protocol that had been the source of their conflict. The irony was not lost on him that their reunion would take place in the very environment that had driven them apart. William straightened his shoulders and checked his reflection in the mirror above the fireplace. The face that looked back at him was older than the one Charlotte had known, marked by the responsibilities that had shaped his days and the regrets that had haunted his nights. He wondered if she would see the changes in him, if she would recognize the man he had become, or only remember the boy he had been. Taking a deep breath, William left the drawing room and began the long walk through the corridors of Sandringham toward his appointment with the past. Each step carried him closer to a conversation that would either restore what had been lost or confirm that some wounds were too deep to heal. His heart pounded with the rhythm of his footsteps, counting down the moments until he would once again be in the presence of the woman who had always seen through his titles to the man beneath. The blue drawing room lay ahead, its doors closed, but somehow radiating the warmth and tension of the reunion waiting within. William paused for one last moment, gathering his courage like armor around his heart, before reaching for the handle that would open the door to his future, whatever that might hold. The blue drawing room had always been William's favorite space at Sandringham, with its walls painted in soothing shades of azure and cream, and windows that captured the afternoon light like precious gems. Today, however, the familiar comfort of the room felt charged with an electric tension that made every breath feel deliberate and weighted with significance. As William pushed open the heavy oak doors, he was immediately struck by the tableau before him. The Queen sat in her customary chair beside the fireplace, her posture erect and commanding despite her advanced years, silver hair perfectly coiffed beneath a simple but elegant hat. She wore one of her signature pastel suits, this one in soft lavender, with her ever-present string of pearls catching the light from the crackling fire. But it was the figure standing near the tall windows that captured William's complete attention, making his heart skip several beats in rapid succession. Charlotte stood with her back partially turned toward the door, engaged in quiet conversation with his grandmother. But even in profile, she was breathtaking in a way that made his chest tighten with emotions he had spent years trying to suppress. She had changed, certainly, but the transformation only served to enhance the beauty he had always known was there. Her auburn hair, once worn long and loose in their youth, was now styled in a sophisticated chignon that revealed the elegant curve of her neck. The simple black dress she wore was clearly expensive but understated, falling to just below her knees and emphasizing her tall, graceful figure without ostentation. When she turned at the sound of his entrance, William felt as though he had been struck by lightning. Her face had lost the softness of youth, replaced by the refined features of a woman who had lived fully and seen much of the world. High cheekbones and a strong jawline gave her an air of determination, while her eyes, still the same startling green he remembered, held depths of experience that spoke of both triumph and sorrow. "William," she said simply, her voice carrying the same musical quality he had never forgotten, though it now possessed a richness that spoke of confidence earned through adversity. She did not smile, but neither did she frown, maintaining the same careful neutrality he had observed from the window. "Charlotte," he replied, his own voice sounding strange to his ears, rougher than he had intended. He moved forward into the room, acutely aware of his grandmother's keen gaze observing every nuance of their interaction. The Queen missed nothing, and William suspected this reunion was being orchestrated with the same precision she applied to matters of state. "How lovely that you two are reunited," the Queen said with practiced diplomacy, though William caught the slight smile that played at the corners of her mouth. "Charlotte has been telling me the most fascinating stories about her work with the International Children's Foundation. Such remarkable accomplishments for someone so young." William felt a familiar stab of inadequacy at his grandmother's words. While he had been attending state dinners and cutting ribbons at hospital openings, Charlotte had been rebuilding schools in war-torn countries and establishing medical clinics in regions where children died from diseases that cost pennies to prevent. The contrast between their lives had never felt more stark or more painful. "Your Majesty is too kind," Charlotte replied with genuine warmth, and William noted how naturally she interacted with his grandmother, as though the years of separation had never occurred. "The real heroes are the local volunteers and aid workers who dedicate their lives to these causes. I'm merely a coordinator, helping to connect resources with needs." Her humility was typical of the Charlotte he remembered, but William could see the quiet pride in her eyes as she spoke about her work. This was a woman who had found her purpose in life and pursued it with unwavering dedication, regardless of the personal cost. He wondered if she had any regrets about the path she had chosen, any moments when she longed for the simplicity of their shared childhood. Nevertheless, the Queen continued, "Your contributions have been substantial. The new orphanage in Lebanon that you helped establish has already provided homes for over 200 children. Such work deserves recognition at the highest levels." William watched as a slight flush colored Charlotte's cheeks, and he realized that his grandmother was not merely making conversation. There was something deliberate about her praise, a purpose behind her words that he could not yet decipher. The Queen was famous for her strategic mind, and every action she took served multiple purposes. "Please, do sit down." The Queen gestured toward the elegant furniture arranged around the fireplace. "I believe we have much to discuss this afternoon." Charlotte moved with practiced grace to claim a chair opposite the Queen, while William found himself choosing a position on the nearby sofa that allowed him to observe both women while participating in the conversation. The formal seating arrangement felt strange after the intimate friendship he and Charlotte had once shared, but he supposed that years and circumstances had changed more than just their appearances. As tea was served by silent, efficient staff members, William found his eyes continually drawn to Charlotte's hands as she handled her cup and saucer with the same natural elegance she had always possessed. Her fingers were longer than he remembered, and he noticed a thin white scar across the back of her left hand that told of some adventure or accident he knew nothing about. How many stories did she carry now that he would never hear? How many experiences had shaped her in ways he could never understand? "I trust your journey from Geneva was comfortable?" the Queen inquired, settling back in her chair with her own cup of tea perfectly balanced on its saucer. "Quite pleasant, thank you," Charlotte replied, "though I confess I was surprised to receive your invitation. It has been some time since I last visited Sandringham." The understatement hung in the air like incense, heavy with implications that none of them wished to address directly. William felt heat rise in his cheeks as he remembered the circumstances of Charlotte's last departure, the harsh words that had been exchanged, and the finality with which she had walked out of his life. "Time has a way of putting things into perspective," the Queen observed mildly, though her sharp eyes moved between William and Charlotte with obvious interest. I have found that distance often clarifies matters that seemed impossible when we were too close to see them properly. William recognized his grandmother's diplomatic language, the careful way she approached sensitive topics without ever addressing them directly. It was a skill he had been trained in from birth, but one that had always felt artificial and frustrating when applied to personal relationships. With Charlotte, he had once been able to speak plainly, to express his true thoughts and feelings without the filter of royal protocol. Indeed, Charlotte agreed, though William caught a slight edge to her voice that suggested she was not entirely comfortable with the direction of the conversation. Though I have learned that some perspectives are worth maintaining, regardless of time or distance. The words were spoken politely, but William felt their sting as surely as if Charlotte had reached across the space between them and slapped him. She was referring to their argument, to the principles she had accused him of abandoning, and her message was clear. She had not changed her mind about his choices or his character. Principles are certainly important, the Queen said smoothly, seemingly oblivious to the undercurrent of tension in the room. Though I have found that the application of principles often requires more flexibility than young people initially understand. What seems black and white at 25 often reveals itself to be quite gray at 45. William wondered if his grandmother was speaking to both of them or directing her words specifically at Charlotte. The Queen had always been a master of subtle communication, able to convey multiple messages within seemingly innocent observations. He suspected that this entire reunion was part of some larger plan that had yet to be revealed. "With respect, Your Majesty," Charlotte said, her voice remaining polite but gaining strength, "I believe some things remain quite clear regardless of age or experience. Right and wrong don't become less distinct simply because acknowledging them becomes more inconvenient." The silence that followed was deafening. William felt as though he were watching a chess match between two masters, each move calculated and precise, but the stakes somehow personal and immediate. His grandmother's slight smile suggested she was not displeased by Charlotte's directness, while Charlotte's steady gaze indicated she would not be intimidated by royal authority, regardless of her respect for the person wielding it. Spoken like someone who has never had to balance competing responsibilities, William said quietly, surprised by his own voice breaking the tense silence. He had not intended to speak, but something about Charlotte's absolute certainty had triggered a defensive response he could not contain. Charlotte turned to look at him directly for the first time since his arrival, her green eyes flashing with emotions he could not read. And, spoken like someone who has never had to choose between comfort and conscience, she replied, her tone remaining level despite the fire in her gaze. "Enough," the Queen said firmly, though not unkindly. "I did not invite you both here to relitigate old arguments. There are more pressing matters to discuss." William felt chastened by his grandmother's rebuke, reminded that he was still, in many ways, the child who had been corrected for poor behavior in this very room decades earlier. Beside him, Charlotte had the grace to look somewhat embarrassed by her own sharp response, though her posture remained defiant. "I apologize, Your Majesty," Charlotte said sincerely. "My words were inappropriate for this setting." "As were mine," William added, though the admission cost him considerable pride. The Queen studied them both for a long moment, her expression unreadable but somehow satisfied. "Youth is often passionate," she observed. "It is one of its most admirable and most dangerous qualities. Passion without wisdom leads to reckless decisions, while wisdom without passion leads to inaction. The challenge is finding the proper balance." She paused to sip her tea, allowing her words to settle in the minds of her listeners. William found himself thinking about the years since Charlotte's departure, the way he had thrown himself into royal duties with desperate determination, trying to prove that his work mattered even as doubt continued to gnaw at him. Had that been passion without wisdom, or wisdom without passion? He was no longer certain. "Charlotte," the Queen continued, "I have followed your work with great interest over the past several years. Your dedication to humanitarian causes is admirable, and Your results have been impressive. However, I believe you may be limiting your potential impact by working outside established power structures rather than within them. Charlotte straightened in her chair, clearly intrigued by the direction of the conversation. I'm not sure I understand what you mean, Your Majesty. The International Children's Foundation does excellent work, the Queen explained, but it operates on the margins of political and economic power. You have helped thousands of children, perhaps tens of thousands, but imagine what you might accomplish with access to greater resources and influence. William began to see where his grandmother was leading the conversation, and he felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension at the implications. The Queen was not one to make casual suggestions, particularly not to someone outside the immediate royal family. Whatever she was proposing would be significant both for Charlotte and for the monarchy itself. I'm grateful for any opportunity to expand our work, Charlotte said carefully, though William could see her natural wariness of royal entanglements. Though I should mention that I have always believed in maintaining independence from political institutions, regardless of their benevolent intentions. A wise policy in most circumstances, the Queen agreed. However, there are times when independence becomes isolation, and isolation limits effectiveness. I am not suggesting that you compromise your principles, merely that you consider how those principles might be better served through different channels. The conversation was moving into territory that William recognized as dangerous. His grandmother was clearly offering Charlotte something significant, but what that might be remained unclear. He found himself hoping that whatever the proposal might be, it would not require Charlotte to abandon the work that had given her life meaning, even as he simultaneously hoped it might provide a reason for her to remain closer to home. I'm listening, Charlotte said simply, and William could see the curiosity warring with caution in her expression. The Queen smiled then, the first genuine expression of pleasure she had shown since William's arrival. Excellent. But perhaps this conversation would be better continued after dinner, when we have more privacy and fewer interruptions. For now, I think it would be beneficial for you and William to reacquaint yourselves with each other. You have both changed considerably over the past few years. The suggestion carried the weight of a royal command, despite its polite phrasing. William felt his stomach clench with nervous anticipation at the prospect of spending time alone with Charlotte, while simultaneously recognizing that such a conversation was inevitable and probably necessary. Charlotte's expression remained neutral, but William caught a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes that suggested she was no more comfortable with the prospect than he was. Nevertheless, she nodded her agreement with characteristic grace. Of course, Your Majesty. I would welcome the opportunity to catch up with William. The formality of her words stung more than William cared to admit. There had been a time when she would have called him by name without hesitation, when the easy intimacy of their friendship had made royal titles irrelevant. Now she spoke to him as she might address any member of the royal family, politely but with careful distance. Wonderful, the Queen said, rising from her chair with the deliberate movement that indicated the formal portion of their meeting had concluded. I shall see you both at dinner. 8 o'clock sharp, and I believe tonight calls for formal dress. As his grandmother moved toward the door, William and Charlotte both rose respectfully, waiting until she had left the room before settling back into their seats. The silence that followed her departure was heavy with 3 years of unspoken words and unresolved emotions. Charlotte was the first to break the quiet, her voice softer than it had been during the formal conversation. She's planning something, she observed, though it was more statement than question. She always is, William agreed, grateful for the neutral topic. Grandmother never does anything without multiple purposes in mind. The question is what she wants from both of us. I suspect, Charlotte said slowly, that it involves more than just reacquainting ourselves with each other. William found himself studying her face as she spoke, noting the way her brow furrowed slightly when she was thinking deeply, the same expression she had worn as a child when contemplating complex puzzles. Some things, at least, had not changed. Are you concerned about what she might propose? He asked, surprising himself with his directness. Charlotte met his gaze steadily, and for a moment, the years fell away, leaving them as they had been before duty and disappointment had driven them apart. "I'm concerned about why she thinks I might be interested," she admitted. "I've spent considerable effort establishing my independence from institutions like this one. And yet you came when she called," William pointed out gently. A shadow crossed Charlotte's features, and William realized there were aspects of her situation he did not understand. "I came because I owe her that much," she said simply. "She was kind to me when I was young, and she has never asked anything of me before now. That alone deserves consideration." The conversation lapsed into silence again, but this time it felt less hostile and more contemplative. William found himself grateful for even this stilted exchange, proof that communication between them was still possible despite everything that had happened. Perhaps there was hope for healing after all, though he dared not let himself believe it too readily. Outside the tall windows, the winter afternoon was beginning to fade into evening, casting long shadows across the frost-covered grounds. Soon they would need to dress for dinner, to engage in the formal rituals that would surround whatever revelation the Queen had planned. But for now, they sat in the growing twilight, two old friends trying to find their way back to each other across the chasm that duty and principle had carved between them. The formal dining room at Sandringham had always impressed visitors with its grandeur, but tonight it seemed to William that every detail had been arranged to create an atmosphere of particular significance. The long mahogany table gleamed under the soft light of crystal chandeliers, set with the finest china and silver that had graced royal tables for generations. Candles flickered in tall holders, casting dancing shadows on the silk wallpaper that depicted pastoral scenes of English countryside. William adjusted his white bow tie for the third time as he descended the main staircase. His evening were feeling unusually constraining tonight. The formal dress requirement had puzzled him, as intimate family dinners at Sandringham typically called for more relaxed attire. His grandmother's insistence on full formal suggested that tonight's dinner was meant to be more than a simple family meal, though he could only speculate about what that might mean. As he approached the dining room, William could hear the soft murmur of conversation from within, punctuated by his grandmother's distinctive laugh. He paused outside the doorway, gathering his composure before entering what he suspected would be an evening that would change everything, though he could not yet imagine how. When he stepped through the doorway, his breath caught in his throat at the sight of Charlotte standing near the fireplace, engaged in animated conversation with the Queen. She wore a midnight blue evening gown that seemed to capture and reflect the candlelight with every movement, the silk fabric flowing like water around her tall frame. Her auburn hair was arranged in an elegant updo that revealed diamond earrings that caught the light like captured stars. The transformation from the woman he had spoken with that afternoon was remarkable, but it was more than just the formal attire that made her seem different. There was a confidence in her bearing that spoke of someone comfortable in any social setting, whether it be a refugee camp in Jordan or a royal dining room in Norfolk. The years had refined her natural grace into something almost regal, though she had never needed a title to command attention. "Ah, William," the Queen said, noting his arrival with evident satisfaction. "How handsome you look tonight." "Doesn't he look well, Charlotte?" William felt heat rise in his cheeks at his grandmother's obvious attempt at matchmaking, but Charlotte's response was gracious and measured. "Very distinguished," she agreed, her green eyes meeting his briefly before returning to the Queen. "Though I suspect he would look distinguished in anything, given his breeding." The comment was polite, but somehow distant, and William wondered if she was deliberately maintaining the formal barriers that had characterized their earlier conversation. He could hardly blame her for being cautious, given the circumstances of their last meeting, but her reserve still stung more than he cared to admit. "Come, let us sit," the Queen suggested, moving toward the table with the measured steps that indicated her age, while somehow never diminishing her authority. "I have arranged for us to dine without additional company tonight. I thought we might benefit from privacy for our conversation." As they took their seats, William found himself positioned directly across from Charlotte, while the Queen sat at the head of the table between them. The arrangement felt deliberate, forcing them to look at each other throughout the meal while allowing his grandmother to observe their interactions with her characteristic attention to detail. The first course was served with the silent efficiency that marked all royal meals, and conversation remained light as they discussed neutral topics like the weather and recent news from London. William found himself stealing glances at Charlotte as she spoke, noting the way she held her fork with the same precise grace she had learned as a child, the way she listened with complete attention to his grandmother's observations about the changing political landscape. It was not until the main course had been served and the staff had withdrawn to a discreet distance that the Queen turned the conversation toward more significant matters. "Charlotte, I hope you have given some thought to our earlier discussion about expanding the impact of your humanitarian work." Charlotte set down her wine glass and folded her hands in her lap, a gesture William remembered from their childhood when she was preparing to give a serious answer to an important question. "I have indeed, Your Majesty, though I confess I remain uncertain about what you are proposing." The Queen smiled, the expression of someone who had been waiting for precisely this opening. "I am proposing that you consider taking on a more formal role in promoting charitable causes, one that would provide you with significantly greater resources and international platform than you currently possess." William felt his fork pause halfway to his mouth as the implications of his grandmother's words began to dawn on him. There was only one type of formal role that would provide the kind of resources and platform she was describing, and it was not one that could be offered lightly or without careful consideration of all its implications. "I'm not sure I understand," Charlotte said slowly, though William suspected she understood perfectly and was simply buying time to process what was being suggested. "I am speaking of the possibility of your taking on royal duties," the Queen said directly, her words falling into the dining room like stones into still water, creating ripples that would reach every corner of their lives. "Specifically, I am considering whether you might be suited to represent the Crown in international humanitarian efforts." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft crackle of logs in the fireplace and the distant sound of wind moving through the bare trees outside. William stared at his grandmother in shock, understanding now why she had insisted on formal dress and privacy for this dinner. She was not making a casual suggestion, but rather offering Charlotte something that had never been offered to someone outside the immediate royal family. Charlotte's face had gone very pale, her composure temporarily shaken by the magnitude of what was being proposed. "Your Majesty, I am deeply honored by your confidence in me, but I must point out that I have no royal connection that would make such a role appropriate." The Queen's smile widened slightly, and William felt his heart begin to race as he realized where this conversation was leading. His grandmother was not someone who made proposals without having already considered every angle, every possibility, every potential solution to any obstacle that might arise. "Royal connections can be established," the Queen said mildly, her eyes moving meaningfully between William and Charlotte. "Through marriage, for instance." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and William felt as though the entire world had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. His grandmother was not merely suggesting that Charlotte take on royal duties. She was proposing that Charlotte marry into the royal family to make such duties possible. And, given the context of their reunion, there was only one potential marriage partner in the room. Charlotte's sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet room, and when she looked across the table at William, her expression was a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been fear. "I think there has been some misunderstanding," she said carefully. "William and are no longer close friends, much less anything that might lead to marriage." "Are you not?" the Queen asked, her tone suggesting she found this statement more interesting than concerning. "How curious. I was under the impression that the affection between you had merely been complicated by circumstances, not destroyed by them." William found his voice at last, though it sounded strange and strained to his own ears. "Grandmother, I hardly think this is the time or place for such suggestions." Charlotte has made her feelings about royal life quite clear, and I have no desire to impose upon her independence." "How noble of you," Charlotte said, and there was an edge to her voice that suggested his words had not been received as he intended. "Though I notice you speak of my feelings and my independence without bothering to ask what they might actually be." The accusation stung, partly because it was accurate, and partly because it echoed the arguments they had fought 3 years earlier. William had always struggled with the tendency to make decisions for others based on what he believed was best for them, a habit that Charlotte had never tolerated with patience. "Then, tell us what they are," the Queen said smoothly, reclaiming control of the conversation with the skill of someone who had been managing difficult discussions for over 7 decades. "Tell us what you think of my proposal, both the professional aspects and the personal implications." Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, her green eyes moving between the Queen and William as she considered her response. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but thoughtful, as though she were thinking through each word before uttering it. "The professional opportunity is extraordinary," she admitted. "Access to the resources and platform you describe could indeed multiply the impact of humanitarian work beyond anything currently possible through independent organizations. The ability to coordinate international relief efforts, to bring world leaders together around shared concerns for vulnerable populations, to leverage royal influence for genuinely meaningful purposes rather than ceremonial ones, is tempting beyond measure." William felt his heart clench at the qualification implicit in her words. She found the work tempting, but what about the personal cost that would be required to access it? "However," Charlotte continued, "the personal implications are considerably more complex. Marriage is not a business arrangement, despite royal tradition to the contrary. It requires mutual affection, shared values, and compatible visions for the future. It requires honesty and trust and the willingness to put another person's well-being above one's own interests." She paused, her eyes meeting William's directly for the first time since the Queen's proposal had been made explicit. "It requires forgiveness for past hurts and faith that future choices will be made together rather than in isolation. I'm not certain that William and I possess those qualities in relation to each other, despite whatever affection may have existed in the past." The words were spoken gently, but they landed like physical blows nonetheless. William understood that Charlotte was not rejecting the possibility outright, but neither was she embracing it. She was being characteristically honest about the obstacles that would need to be overcome, the emotional work that would be required from both of them if such an arrangement were to have any hope of success. "Affection can be rekindled," the Queen observed, "particularly when it was genuine to begin with. Shared values can be rediscovered, and compatible visions can be developed through honest communication. The other qualities you mention are choices that two people make together, not predetermined characteristics that either exist or do not." William found himself marveling at his grandmother's optimism, her apparent belief that the wounds between him and Charlotte could be healed through will and effort. Perhaps it came from having lived through 7 decades of marriage, of having learned that love was as much about commitment as it was about emotion. "You speak as though affection were a tap that could be turned on and off at will," Charlotte said, though not unkindly. "My experience has been that genuine feeling cannot be manufactured, regardless of how convenient it might be to possess it. And yet," the Queen replied, "you came here when I invited you, despite having no obligation to do so. You have spent the day in William's company without storming out or demanding to leave. You are sitting here now, considering a proposal that would tie your life permanently to his, instead of rejecting it immediately as impossible. These do not strike me as the actions of someone entirely indifferent to his welfare." Charlotte's cheeks colored slightly at the observation, and William found himself holding his breath as he waited for her response. His grandmother had a point, though he dared not hope too much that Charlotte's presence indicated any softening of her feelings toward him. I came because I respect you, Charlotte said finally. I have remained because I respect the seriousness of what you are proposing, even if I have reservations about its wisdom. But respect and affection are not the same thing, and neither is obligation. No, they are not, the Queen agreed. But they are foundations upon which affection can be rebuilt given time and effort from both parties. The question is whether you believe such effort would be worthwhile, and whether you trust William enough to undertake it with him. The question hung between them like a bridge that Charlotte could either cross or abandon, and William found himself desperately wanting to say something that might influence her decision, while simultaneously recognizing that anything he said might have the opposite effect. This was Charlotte's choice to make, and his attempts to persuade her in either direction had never ended well in the past. I need time to think, Charlotte said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. This is not a decision that should be made quickly or under pressure, regardless of how honored I am by your confidence in me. Of course, the Queen said graciously. Take all the time you require. Though I hope you will spend some of that time talking with William about what such an arrangement might look like, should you decide to consider it seriously. William felt his grandmother's expectant gaze settle on him, and he realized that his own response was being evaluated as carefully as Charlotte's had been. This was not merely about whether Charlotte would accept the Queen's proposal, but about whether he was prepared to be the kind of partner she would need, the kind of man who could support her work rather than constrain it. If Charlotte is willing to discuss it, he said carefully, I would welcome the opportunity to explore how we might work together, both professionally and personally. Though I want to be clear that my interest is in finding a path that serves her goals and values, not just the Crown's needs. The words felt inadequate as soon as he spoke them, too formal and diplomatic for the magnitude of what was being discussed. But Charlotte's expression softened slightly, suggesting that his attempt at consideration had been noted, even if it had not been entirely successful. Perhaps, she said slowly, we could take a walk tomorrow morning, after I have had time to process what has been proposed tonight. The grounds were always conducive to honest conversation. I would like that very much, William replied, and for the first time since Charlotte's arrival, he felt a genuine spark of hope that they might find their way back to each other, even if the path would be neither simple nor straightforward. The Queen beamed at them both with evident satisfaction, as though she had orchestrated exactly the outcome she had been hoping for. Excellent. And now I think we should enjoy our dessert and speak of lighter matters. Tomorrow will bring whatever decisions it will bring, but tonight we're simply old friends sharing a meal. As the conversation turned to safer topics, William found himself stealing glances at Charlotte throughout the remainder of dinner, noting the way the candlelight played across her features and wondering what thoughts were moving behind her thoughtful expression. Whatever tomorrow might bring, at least they would have the opportunity to speak honestly with each other, perhaps for the first time since a friendship had been severed by pride and misunderstanding. The possibility both terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure, carrying the promise of either redemption or final closure to the most important relationship of his life. Dawn came slowly to Sandringham, painting the frost-covered landscape in shades of pearl and rose that seemed to hold the promise of transformation. William had barely slept, spending most of the night standing at his window, watching the stars fade into morning light while his mind churned through every possible outcome of the conversation that lay ahead. Now, dressed in warm clothes suitable for walking, he made his way through the quiet corridors toward the entrance hall where he and Charlotte had arranged to meet. She was already there when he arrived, wrapped in a long wool coat the color of winter storms, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders in a style that reminded him powerfully of their youth. She looked up as he approached, and he was struck by the vulnerability in her expression, as though the night had stripped away some of the careful composure she had maintained since her arrival. "Good morning," she said softly, her breath visible in the cold air, streaming through the entrance doors that stood slightly ajar. "Good morning," William replied, noting the uncertainty in her voice that matched his own feelings. "I thought we might walk toward the lake, if that suits you. It should be quiet there at this hour." Charlotte nodded her agreement, and together they stepped out into the crisp morning air. Their footsteps crunched on the frost-covered gravel as they made their way down the familiar path that led through the estate grounds toward the ornamental lake that had been the scene of so many childhood adventures. Neither spoke as they walked, but the silence felt companionable rather than hostile, as though they were both gathering their courage for what was to come. The lake appeared before them like a mirror reflecting the pale sky, its surface broken only by the gentle movement of a few waterfowl who had not yet departed for warmer climates. A wooden bench sat beside the water, placed there generations ago for visitors who wished to contemplate the peaceful scene. It was here that William and Charlotte had often come as children to escape the formal atmosphere of the house, to speak freely about their fears and dreams without the constant awareness of being observed. "Shall we sit?" William suggested, gesturing toward the familiar bench. Charlotte settled beside him, leaving enough space between them to maintain propriety while still allowing for intimate conversation. For several minutes, they simply sat in comfortable silence, watching the mist rise from the water and listening to the morning sounds of the estate awakening around them. "I didn't sleep much last night," Charlotte finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nor did I," William replied. "I kept thinking about everything your grandmother proposed, and about us, and about whether any of it could possibly work." Charlotte turned to look at him directly, and William was surprised by the depth of emotion he saw in her green eyes. "Tell me honestly, William, setting aside what the Queen wants, setting aside duty and obligation, and all the complicated politics of royal life, what do you want?" The question was simple and devastating in its directness, cutting through all the diplomatic language and careful consideration that had characterized their conversation the night before. William felt his heart begin to race as he realized that this was his moment to be completely honest, perhaps his only chance to say what he had been afraid to acknowledge even to himself. "I want you," he said simply, the words emerging with surprising steadiness despite the tremor he felt in his chest. "I have wanted you since we were 20 years old, and I have never stopped wanting you, even when I was angry with you, even when I convinced myself that we were too different to make each other happy." Charlotte's eyes widened at his confession, and William saw surprise, confusion, and something that might have been hope flicker across her features. "But you never said anything," she whispered. "All those years, you never gave any indication that you felt anything beyond friendship." "Because I was a coward," William admitted, the self-judgment harsh but accurate. "Because I was afraid that admitting my feelings would change everything between us, and I valued our friendship too much to risk losing it. Because I believed that you deserved better than a life constrained by royal protocol and public scrutiny." "And what do you believe now?" Charlotte asked, her voice gaining strength even as her eyes remained vulnerable. William was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. "Now I believe that I was arrogant to make that decision for you without giving you the choice. I believe that friendship, however precious, is not enough when you love someone the way I love you. And I believe that royal protocol and public scrutiny are just circumstances that can be managed if two people are committed to managing them together." The words hung between them like a confession and a plea, and William found himself holding his breath as he waited for Charlotte's response. He had laid himself completely bare, admitted not just his feelings but his failures, and now there was nothing left to do but trust her with his heart. Charlotte was quiet for what felt like an eternity, her gaze fixed on the lake as she processed what he had said. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Do you have any idea how long I waited for you to say something like that? How many nights I lay awake wondering if you felt anything beyond friendship, or if I was deluding myself about the connection between us?" William felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him, hope and regret warring in his chest as he began to understand the magnitude of his miscalculation. "Charlotte, let me finish," she said gently, turning to face him fully. "I left 3 years ago not just because I was disappointed in your choices, but because it was too painful to watch you from the sidelines, to love you and believe that you would never see me as anything more than a childhood friend. I threw myself into humanitarian work partly because it mattered to me, but also because it was the only way I could think of to build a life that felt meaningful without you in it. The pain in her voice was evident, and William felt a crushing sense of responsibility for all the years they had lost to his failure to speak honestly about his feelings. "I'm so sorry," he said, reaching for her hand without thinking. "I'm sorry for being too afraid to tell you how I felt, and I'm sorry for letting you believe that you didn't matter to me in that way." Charlotte looked down at their joined hands, her fingers tightening around his as though she were afraid he might disappear. "We were both young," she said softly. "We both made mistakes. The question is whether we're too old now to correct them." William felt his heart leap at the implication of her words, but he forced himself to remain cautious. "What are you saying, Charlotte?" She met his eyes then, and he saw in them the same courage that had always defined her, the willingness to face difficult truths regardless of their consequences. "I'm saying that I never stopped loving you either. I'm saying that I came here not just out of respect for your grandmother, but because I hoped, against my better judgment, that there might still be something worth salvaging between us." The relief that flooded through William was so intense, it was almost painful. 3 years of loneliness and regret suddenly transformed into the possibility of redemption. "And now, after everything that's been said, do you still think there's something worth salvaging?" Charlotte's smile was tentative but real, the first genuine expression of happiness he had seen from her since her arrival. "I think there might be something worth building," she said carefully. "Not salvaging what we had before, but creating something new that incorporates everything we've learned since then." William brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her fingers as he had longed to do for years. "I would like that very much, but I need you to know that if we do this, if we try to build something together, I want it to be real. Not an arrangement for the convenience of the crown, not a business partnership disguised as a marriage, but a genuine relationship between two people who love each other. Even if it means challenging royal tradition?" Charlotte asked, and William heard an echo of their old arguments in the question. "Especially if it means challenging royal tradition," William replied firmly. "I've spent 3 years thinking about what you said to me that night, about the choices I was making and the man I was becoming. You were right, Charlotte. I was hiding behind protocol and duty instead of using my position to make the kind of difference that actually matters." Charlotte studied his face carefully, as though looking for signs of insincerity or self-deception. "And what about now? What kind of difference do you want to make?" William felt the weight of the question, understanding that his answer would determine not just their personal future, but the shape of whatever professional partnership might emerge from the Queen's proposal. "I want to use every resource at my disposal to address the humanitarian crises you've been fighting alone. I want to leverage royal influence to save lives, to protect the vulnerable, to build the kind of world we used to dream about when we were young and thought anything was possible. Together?" Charlotte asked, and there was hope in her voice now, mixed with the caution that experience had taught her. "Together," William confirmed. "As partners in every sense of the word. I know I have a lot to prove to you. That words alone won't undo years of disappointment, but if you're willing to give me the chance, I want to show you that I can be the man you always believed I could become." Charlotte was quiet again, but this time William sensed that she was not struggling with doubt, but rather with the overwhelming possibility of hope fulfilled. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but emotional. "Your grandmother is very clever, you know. She understood something that we were both too stubborn to see for ourselves." "What's that?" William asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "That we need each other," Charlotte said simply. "Not just romantically, though that's part of it, but professionally and personally and in ways that go deeper than either of us fully understands. I've accomplished a great deal on my own, but I've also been limited by working outside existing power structures. You have access to incredible resources and influence, but you've been constrained by protocol and tradition. Together, we might be able to do things that neither of us could accomplish alone. William felt the rightness of her observation settle over him like a comfortable coat, the sense that they had finally found the path that had been eluding them for years. So, you're willing to consider the Queen's proposal, both the professional opportunity and the personal implications? Charlotte smiled then, the radiant expression he remembered from their youth, unguarded and full of joy. I'm willing to consider building a life together that incorporates both. A marriage based on love and partnership, and work that channels our combined resources toward the causes we both care about. It won't be easy, and it will require us to be braver than we've been in the past, but I think it might be extraordinary. William felt tears prick at his eyes as the magnitude of what she was offering struck him fully. Are you sure? Really sure? Because once we commit to this path, there won't be any going back. Royal marriages are public property in a way that other relationships aren't, and the scrutiny will be intense. I've lived with scrutiny for years, Charlotte replied. The difference will be that this time, I'll have someone beside me who understands what it means and who shares my commitment to using it constructively rather than just enduring it. William stood then, pulling Charlotte to her feet beside him, and found himself overwhelmed by the need to express physically what words seemed inadequate to convey. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rougher than he had intended. Charlotte's answer was to step closer, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, as she looked into his eyes with an expression of love and trust that took his breath away. "I've been waiting for you to ask that question for 15 years, she whispered. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, acknowledging the preciousness of the moment while honoring the uncertainty they had both carried for so long. But as Charlotte's arms moved around his neck and William's hands found the small of her back, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of years of longing finally being allowed expression. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, William rested his forehead against Charlotte's and felt as though his entire world had been rearranged into something more beautiful than he had ever imagined possible. "So what happens now?" Charlotte asked, her voice slightly breathless but filled with happiness. "Now we go back to the house and tell my grandmother that she was right," William replied, unable to suppress the grin that was spreading across his face. "And then we start planning a wedding and a new kind of royal duty that actually changes the world." Charlotte laughed then, the sound carrying across the lake like music, and William knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The boy and girl who had once dreamed of making the world better had finally found their way back to each other and to their shared purpose, older and wiser, but with their capacity for hope intact. As they walked back towards Sandringham hand in hand, the morning sun breaking through the clouds to cast everything in golden light, William felt overcome not just with love for the woman beside him, but with gratitude for the grandmother who had possessed the wisdom to see what they could not see themselves. Sometimes the most powerful forces in life were not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but simply the courage to speak honestly and the willingness to believe that love, given the chance, could indeed conquer all obstacles. The future stretched before them, uncertain in its details, but bright with possibility, and for the first time in years, William felt truly excited about what lay ahead. Together, they would find a way to honor both duty and conscience, to serve both crown and humanity, and to build a love story that would stand as proof that some dreams, however long deferred, are worth waiting for.